All right, so what's up?
Do you so the debate bro thing, bro? What do you think's going on with the debate bro thing?
Um, Fuck. It's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like there's a lot of different ways you can interpret it, and I feel like everybody is maybe talking about a different thing, and it makes it really hard to like respond to anything. Like, cause I don't even know what people mean when they say the debate bro thing. Like some people, when they say debate bro, they literally just mean like anybody who does debate.
Mm.
And I'm just like, okay, like this, yeah.
So I
Um,
sent you over a link to one of Aiden's tweets from that ginormous thread. Um, like, just because I feel like this is the one tweet that kind of highlights like three pillars of what they personally or she personally felt. You
hmm.
know, the term encompassed, and I feel like these are good places to start. So like not fully listening to the people they're arguing with, general hostility, and then glorifying debate is a higher form of engaging with ideas.
Sure. So let's go through them.
Sure.
So not fully listening to the people they're arguing with.
Mm-hmm.
I could say this. I feel like some people might call me a debate pro. I could say that over the past week, I feel like almost anyone I've talked to doesn't fully listen to me or the ideas that I'm trying to put forward. I don't feel like that's like a debate bro thing. I just feel like that's generally how people engage with conversations online. And I think like from my I guess perspective at least, I feel like the people who are very um good at debating in general have sort of more of a knack for listening to people's arguments or understanding them and responding to them. So I would say that's like I would say the first one is, from my experience at least, is more prevalent in like the other people and not necessarily sort of the debate people, because I feel like sort of the ability to debate effectively sort of entails an ability to listen to other people's arguments and respond to them.
So the signals that somebody is picking up to label you as listening or not listening, what do you think they're looking for to make that determination as to whether or not you're listening to them?
Um, Other people? That's a hard question to answer. I think I don't think there's like any universal way. I could maybe talk about like the way that I do it.
Sure. How do you do it?
Sure. So the way that I do it specifically is that I will listen to what they say when they say things. So if I ask a question or if I make a point, I will listen to their response and I will determine whether or not that was a response to the point that I made. And if I don't feel like it was, then I will restate my point until I feel like I get, or restate or reframe my point in a way until I get the response that I think is a response to the point that I made.
I think that's bad. Do you think that that's bad at all or no?
I don't think how else I could do it, I guess.
So the the underlying thinking that this betrays is that in order to feel like you've been listened to, you feel like you need a response that you consider valid to the point that you're making. And
Well,
so
yeah.
and so you're saying your solution to that, if there's, room there that between the response and what you expect of it, is to continue reframing your point until the other person understands it. And I
Yeah.
think that's generally your focus throughout the conversation, is making sure you're understood by the other person, right?
Yeah. How is that bad?
Because I think most people work the exact opposite, or they're hoping that the other person is working the opposite way, where they're trying to listen to the other
And
person. And that's like goal number one. And then goal number two is figure out how you can plug your thing into what they're talking about.
I feel like we're talking past each other now. Can I
Why?
can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So if we're having a conversation, right? And I'm saying, "What color is the sky?" And the other person says, "Banana." I'd be like, um okay, so if you look up at the sky, like what colors do you see? And they're like table. Are we having a fruitful conversation? I
Mm, I guess not.
Yeah, because that's how I feel a lot of the time talking to people.
Do you think that going to an analogy like that to generalize like what conversations are like for you with other people, do you think that kind of gets more at what I'm trying to point at? That there's this like, I think that you feel differently about conversations, and the way that you feel about them comes off in the way that you engage with other people. That's like my underlying thesis. That's kind of like what I'm going into here with, like, to be transparent.
Well, sure, but I feel like a lot of people engage in conversations online where they are not interested in having a conversation, but mostly interested in just saying what they think.
What do you think is necessary to have a conversation?
I think to have a conversation, it is necessary to engage with what the other person is saying. Otherwise, we could both just be talking to like a wall independently, like just talking on our own streams.
But your goal
Like
doesn't
what?
seem to be focused around engaging with what they're talking about. It seems to be on making sure you're understood and that the responses match. So you expect other
Wait,
people
well,
to
no, no,
do
no.
the listening.
Wait, wait. So this was. So I believe the question that you asked me was, how do you make sure that somebody is listening to you, right?
Yeah.
Or yeah. So the way that I would make sure that somebody is listening to me is that I would make sure that they understand what I'm saying, and I would expect the other person to do the same. So if they ask a question or make a point, and I make a point that doesn't directly relate to what they said, then I would expect them to ask questions of me or rephrase it until we have a sort of a mutual understanding there.
Yeah. So when you make those determinations, I think it upsets people a lot of the time. So if you immediately jump to a conclusion like, oh, no, 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 this point isn't relevant to my point. Or like, no, 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 your response isn't taking into account what I just said. Or you do things like that. I think it's a normal thing to point out. I think you do it a lot, though. And when you do it a lot, it betrays to everybody else that you're mostly concerned with and viewing everything only from your lens, and that you want everybody's the way that they're saying everything to match exactly with what you're saying, or to respond to it in a way that you're expecting and not necessarily in a way that you're not expecting. Because when it's a way that you don't
Sure.
expect, I think that's when you make the determination that, like, oh, this response is not a proper response. It's not addressing what I expected them to address in it, and thus I don't think they understood what I was saying. Or
Okay,
sometimes,
yeah.
and this is like a separate thing, is like you see what they're saying, and you can see like a bigger level argument that you've heard before, and you want to stop the conversation really quick or point that out. And I think to other people who don't do the debate stuff all the time, when you do that, it comes off as like uber condescending. I think that's like another like debate bro specific problem. It is the problem that comes out of being an expert, or like a quote unquote expert in doing the thing, is that once you do it enough, when you see those patterns and stuff, you want to point them out, but you can't because the person you're talking to is not tuned in at that level, and it comes off bad.
Okay, so there's a few points there. To the first point, in terms of like understanding where they're coming from, um, I feel like this is an evolution that has happened to most people who do sort of debate content on Twitch. Is that I think at first you always go in expecting people to like make points or like discuss with you or like have a talk about like a certain topic or whatever. But I feel like the more you do it, the more you realize that generally people aren't really interested in engaging with like what the other person says. Like, and this is true not only for like left leaning people or like right leaning people, but just like in general. It seems like people just aren't interested in engaging with the other people. Like if you're on a panel show with like 12 people, usually it's just like 12 people just individually answering like certain questions in like sort of their own kind of framing,
Mm-hmm.
but none of them engaging with like the arguments of the other person or like trying to come to an understanding.
Yeah.
Where when I do debates or discussions, I feel like I am usually solely interested in trying to build an understanding, or at least acknowledging specifically where we diverge on the points. right?
Sure.
So if I say the sky is blue, and you say the sky is red, then I'm not interested in the conclusion of whether or not the color is one way or another. I'm interested in finding out specifically at the point where we diverge, and if that diversion or where we diverge is logical in some sort of way, or if there's a merit to your point that I'm not seeing. But
Okay.
usually, I feel like people get boggled up in sort of the red versus blue analogy instead, and they just keep saying no, but actually it's blue. Don't you know? I mean, I have a lot of friends who say it's blue. I know this. It says it's blue, and the other person says, oh, but actually it's red because my whole life I've been growing up looking at the sky. It's red. Fucking every single time I pick up my glasses and look up, it's red. I mean, you know.
Hmm.
And
But
this is sort of, I guess, yeah.
yeah. But the problem is when you go into these conversations, you're also convinced of your idea, and you're looking to convince other people of the idea. I think the problem
Well,
is that, and
well,
anybody that does that is going to have these resulting issues.
yeah, sure. So I would say that I at least try as much as I can to engage every single conversation in good faith
Hmm.
and from the point of view that I might be wrong on these issues, which is why I try to find out specifically where we diverge. Because if we're just spending all day discussing whether it's like red or blue, then I don't feel like I could ever be convinced because we're not addressing where our actual disagreements lie.
Mm.
But if our actual disagreement is somewhere down the back, if our actual disagreements is, well, actually, if they make the point that actually if you look at the wavelength of the sky, actually inherently it is red, but through the way that we look at it through the ozone layer and the clouds and all of this, it actually gives it a bluish shade instead. Then I could say, oh, well, actually, that's something I've never thought about before. That's super interesting. Well, maybe the sky is actually red from like your perspective or like from what you're speaking about, right?
Mm.
But if we're just talking about the colors and one person makes arguments based on, well, when I look up, it's red, and the other one says, well, I look up, it's blue, then I feel like we can never reach a point where we convince each other.
Okay.
Yeah, we're talking about different parts of a topic generally. And what I feel like that I want to do specifically with my content, and I don't feel like I again I can't speak for like everybody who's called like a quote unquote debate bro or
Sure.
whatever. But what I want to do, or I guess what I try to do, is that I will try to find out specifically what the topic should be, and then find out where our divergence is on the topic. Because I feel like most of the time, if I don't even know what the actual topic is, then it's hard to have a fruitful conversation. Then we're just having two monologues. And I
Right.
feel like a big part of that is truly listening to the other person and asking questions which makes them justify why they believe what they believe rather than just stating the end goal or the ending points of whatever they believe.
Mm. So
Fuck.
do you,
Yeah, sorry.
so you don't feel then that the number one, the not fully listening to people they're arguing with, you don't feel like that applies to you at all?
No, I don't think so.
If you were to give
At
like a
least,
percentage that it
I mean,
applies.
I would say that I hope not so. And I feel like when people say this to me, it is because um it's because I will make a point and they will make an answer, but the answer will not be addressing my point. And I will say that it isn't, and then they'll say, "Oh, but you're not listening."
But you say that too, and then it gets really frustrating.
Well,
Because
yeah, obviously.
because sometimes if they give you an answer, it feels like what you're saying is your answer was not sufficient, and it's like, but
Yeah,
that's my answer to your question, and instead of
sure, but
moving
then
on, you
but then
want
I
to push the same point.
well, no, but then I would try and ask clarifying questions to their answer to understand where they're coming from.
Mm.
Like very, very rarely will I say you're not answering my question and just leave it there. I mean, I will do that sometimes if it happens a lot or if I'm like frustrated or whatever. But generally, what I'll try to do is I'll ask another clarifying question to sort of figure out like what do they actually mean. So I think a good example, I guess a good example could be like the neoliberal discussion or whatever, right? Because I talk with Chud, and I asked him what is leftism, right? And then he says, well, it's anti-capitalist. And then I'll say, okay, that's interesting. And then I'll give some examples. So do you think this is leftism? And he'll say yes. Or I'll ask, like, do you think anarcho-syndicalism is leftism? And he'll say yes, because it's anti-capitalist. And I'll say, okay, well, do you think social democracy is leftism? And he'll say, well, yes, because it's anti-capitalist.
So what's your goal in this conversation, just for context?
So the goal, in what specifically? In my example here, or
Yeah.
in the conversation with Chud?
Yeah.
So the goal in my specific example here to you, or the goal in the conversation that I had with Chud?
Like, so when you do these questions and stuff, for me, it feels like it embodies sort of the general styles that I think people refer to as like debate techniques and whatever, that they're generally like not super responding to. I think this starts to get in the general vein of it. So that's part of the reason why I'm asking what the purpose here would be. Like, what is your goal at the end of this questioning? Like, you're trying to do something about Chud's argument or Chud's position. I think you're trying to undermine it and prove that it's silly or something.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to prove my point, obviously.
Okay.
Like if I mean, at the end of the day, because I will have when I go into an argument, I will have my points laid out and how I think one point leads logically to the next point, leads logically to the next point, that leads to a conclusion. And that is what I'm trying to lay out in a conversation, right? So if we disagree on the first premise, then then obviously we will not reach the same conclusion, right? If I have a premise and a conclusion, if we disagree on the first premise, then we'll have to sort that out before we can move on to the next premise to sort that out before we can reach a common conclusion.
You organizing it this way and forcing it to be organized this way and like making sure that the whole conversation goes this way within these parameters, I think also hits on point number 3, which is the glorifying debate as a higher form of engaging with ideas. Because anytime anybody pushes against the sides of like that kind of conversation where it feels like, oh no, we're getting to a place where we're going to deviate from the premises, or oh no, we're getting to a place where this response is not adequate, or oh no, we're getting to a place where they're not focusing on the right part of this question or of my statement, or oh no, I need to explain this single point because my argument hinges on it. I think like being so invested in those structures or in those ways of doing it really comes off to other people. But the way that they interpret it oftentimes can be negative, especially if, like, frankly, they have a negative opinion of you or your ideology or whatever, then obviously it's going to make that much worse. And that is what it is. But I think generally, if you're doing things like that, these are also like signals to other people about that kind of creating like a debate environment and like forcing them into these questions and whatever. I think for some people that can be really anxiety inducing, especially.
I understand.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, sure. I understand completely that it can be anxiety inducing. I 100%, because I feel that myself. Like I've felt that myself.
Could you
throughout my
understand how
life.
they think it's bad faith?
No.
Okay.
So I would understand how it's anxiety inducing, but I do not understand how asking clarifying questions to your point is bad faith.
Okay, so you think of them as clarifying questions, but I don't think you're
Yes.
quite taking it fully into account from the perspective I'm saying, where these are anxiety inducing, and they're not just anxiety inducing because they imply you have some kind of structure you're pushing them down. They're anxiety inducing because if they have this negative stereotype of you, combined with the fact that you're pushing them down this like clear dialogue tree, and that your point there is to make your point in the conversation be heard, and by consequence prove their point wrong. All of these things coming together and then doing this question tree thing is what a lot of the times can make people feel anxious, because it feels like that's where the bad faith things comes in. Is if we mix all these things together, it ends up creating a situation where they're not confident that you're on their team for this, or that you're willing to work with them on something, and it feels like you're setting them up to fall, and you're constantly trying to trip them up rather than actually like come to agreement constructively on anything. And they're worried that if they get hurt in that process, or if they follow along with what you're doing, that you have this whole thing planned out for them, and that's really scary.
Sure, but this is the thing, right? This is the issue that I have, is that I don't know what the alternative is for having a good discussion or like coming to any sort of conclusion there. Because I feel like if we're walking down sort of your logic tree there, or like your like the conclusions to what you're saying, is that I'm not able to sort of discuss or like ask them clarifying questions in the way that I'm asking them, or like make analogies or do the things that I do, then I feel like the end conclusion is always going to be, okay, we just agree to disagree.
And is that bad?
Well, I would say yeah.
Huh.
I mean, then I don't feel like there is then if the point of any conversation is to platform their ideas to my stream
No, no,
and
no,
not
no.
push back
No.
and not push back to that and not push back against them in the way that I think is a good pushback, then I feel like there is no point to having all these conversations.
Oh, okay. So let's pause for 2 seconds. So do you see how that kind of wording, this kind of, but I'm bringing them onto my platform, and if I bring them on there without criticizing heavily their point that I disagreed with, and that's why I brought them on, then what is the point of this? And it's like, okay, but that
Yeah.
structure is what people think of about this debate bro structure thing. When you set everything up to where your purpose is that, the structure is that, your priorities are that, this is all, this goes to point two. This is, you're creating an environment of hostility from the get-go. So it's not, like, do you see that or no?
Well, sure, but it depends on the conversation, right? So like not all conversations have to be an environment of hostility. It depends on the conversation. Like if the conversation merits an environment of like hostility or like inherent question asking, then obviously, yeah, there should be. Example, if I'm talking to like a neo-Nazi, and that neo-Nazi is spreading ideology of race realism and how like actually white people are suppressed in the US and like white people should bond together.
Could we go with like a closer to normal anecdote instead of like a neo-Nazi? Like what's another example of something you feel like is closer to like the fence of like where that should have been allowed or where that shouldn't have been allowed? Because Nazi is pretty clear. I would agree that that should be a fairly hostile conversation.
Sure. So fuck, it's hard to say like conversations that I've engaged in where I think I've been hostile. I think there's very few.
Because what I'm looking for in this is for you to just give that like these three characterizations could be said to match your general style. And I think it's okay if you accept that and just move forward with it and say that that's the cost of doing debate or your style or whatever. But I'm mostly looking to get validation that like what Aiden's saying here can be used to characterize your kind of conversation. Because that's mostly what I'm like.
Well, sure.
Confused
So
about.
So I will say the third one.
Uh-huh.
I'd say even the third one. I feel like that's a bit hyperbolic, but I would agree
Yeah,
with the third one
glorifying
probably.
is kind of like,
Yeah, yeah,
a charged
yeah.
word.
But
What,
using debate as a good way to engage with ideas,
as a better way, better than
is as a
most.
better way to engage in with. Yeah, exactly. I would say yes.
Okay.
I don't think that inherently disregards or minimalizes like other forms of learning.
I think
I
it
don't
does by definition. So if you're saying that this is generally better, then you're necessarily saying the other ones are generally worse.
Well, sure, but I don't think debating and learning are similar things necessarily, right? So I would say
Okay.
the other forms of learning, I would say like reading articles or books or whatever. That's like other ways of learning. I
I
don't think
think
those are.
other
But I
people treat debate a lot of the times is a learning experience. And again, I think this comes down to how other people are interpreting these conversations is very different than how you are. And so that this is just that coming to light, is that some people are looking for something very different, and something more of like a conversation where it's like, you're to the right and I'm way to the left. I don't really know anything about right people. So it'd be interesting to like explore that world, but they don't want to do that in hostility or in needing to defend every single one of their points or things like that, or feeling attacked constantly through it, because then that's not a fun experience, especially if they're not super hard on their points too. Like this is the other thing that I say in tutoring too, is like when we create an environment where everybody feels open or like willing to admit where they do and don't understand stuff, people are way more likely to change their mind. But the second it turns hostile, or it feels like everybody has to defend their positions, and we're doing that from the get-go, then some people are going to disengage entirely, or come up with points they don't believe in.
I believe fundamentally that if you have a strong enough belief or a strong enough position that you're willing to go on a big platform and talk to like hundreds of people about that, then you should have it thought out to some extent. You should be able to defend it in like a debate with like basic questions. I do feel like. And I feel if you are not able to do that, then you're engaging in something that's irresponsible.
So hold on. Can you repeat that one more time?
Sure. So if you have a belief in a topic, in something of a topic, right? And you believe so strongly that you are willing to go on a platform to talk about it in front of hundreds of people, you should be able to defend those ideas for like against like basic questioning. I don't feel that's like a high bar.
Do you think that people necessarily believe strongly in their ideas if they go online to talk about them?
Well, no, but I would say that's like a bad thing if they don't, because that's what I do.
Well, I mean, there you go. So that's you're glorifying certain processes of arriving at conclusions over other people's. For some people, for like a good chunk of their life, lived experience and whatever is like good enough for them. And I think if you want to expose them to debate as like what you believe to honestly be a better form of discussion and learning and whatever, then I just feel like having the hostile environment, or creating an environment where they feel uncomfortable about defending their ideas is probably not the best. But it's necessitated if that's the way you're treating these conversations.
And so this is let me give you another example. So I had a debate about a few months ago with a few people where we talked about vaccines, right? And I would say I think vaccines should be 100% mandatory for everyone, like for all children. Like for all children, vaccines should be mandatory. There should be no exemptions, no religious exemptions, no other whatever. And then I would talk to some people, and they would say, okay, yeah, but did you consider they will often make arguments based on either their personal experience. They will say, oh well, but I have like a friend who didn't vaccinate their child and that turned out pretty fine. And then I guess I would sort of attack that argument, and I would say, okay, well, do you understand sort of the concepts of vaccinations and how we can see demonstrably, if we look at like the data and statistics or whatever, that like overall children who aren't vaccinated are much worse off than children who are, and even the amount of like even the difference there is skewed by the fact that like the majority of people are vaccinated. So even if you aren't, you still have a lesser chance of being hit by things because other people are. Like I'll make these types of arguments, and then they will appeal to things that don't address anything that I've said, or they will say, yeah, but that doesn't mean that everybody's gonna be
anytime you
off.
say didn't address what I said, I have to take that with like an uber big grain of salt. So just know that anytime you say that, I'm not like counting it in the list of things that you're listing off.
Sure. So when I'll give the examples, okay?
Well,
so
hold
they
on.
will either.
Can I note one other thing?
Sure.
And this is like it kind of goes to the general debate bro thing. It's you have a habit of using hyperbolic anecdotes or hyperbolic like examples, especially when it's like in defense of your own point, and to other people that also comes off really, really bad, or it leaves them with something that they can't really engage with because you've made it so hyperbolic that it like begs the question. Sometimes when you set up debates too, they are also built on premises that like beg the question. Like some of your definition debates are like that as well, and people have pointed it out, but I don't feel like it gets worded properly to you.
Well, sure, but this is like a very valid way to arrive at conclusions, right? Like taking your argument to its logical extremes is like a fundamental of like changing
separate.
your mind or
That's
understanding your arguments.
separate from what I'm specifically talking here about your hyperbolic anecdotes.
Well, yeah, I make a hyperbolic anecdote to illustrate the point. That's the point of like
but it doesn't
like
help
an
you
analogy.
that way because it carries a different
Well,
meaning to the people that you're talking to.
Well, sure, but that's I guess
So if you know
I would
it
say
does
that is sure. So I will say that is them not wanting to come to terms with what they're saying.
Don't start down this path, Dario. Remember when I first talked to you about rhetoric and stuff like that, and you were exactly on the same page about if what you're saying is having a different effect on people, then the effect is what you should be planning for and measuring and your choice of language.
Sure, but there is an extent to that, right? So let's say that I'm having an argument with somebody, and every single time I make any counter, like they say, no, I don't feel like I should vaccinate my children. Right? Do you think that's like a fair example, or that's like a? I could make a Nazi example. Whatever. Let's say that. Let's say I'm talking to a person. They say I don't feel like I should vaccinate my children, and then I'll say, well,
like that example in and of itself, like choosing the anti-vaxxer, like okay, well Dario versus the anti-vaxxer, most people are already
this is discussions that I've had with people on this platform.
I think the line that you need to walk is you need to recognize when the other party is going to take issue with the conflation of the hyperbolic example and the one that this is supposed to relate back to.
Well, that would, but I would say that would be on them to illustrate how that's a conflation,
if you
or how that's not
your,
like a good
if
analogy.
you want to like make your point
so
like more effectively,
this is
you have
going
to be
to
able
turn
to
into
recognize
something.
when they're going to take issue.
So if there's going to be somebody else, there's going to immediately turn to something different than where I want to take it. So if you want to talk to other people, that's fine.
No.
I can go if it's.
Yeah. Just don't say anything, Bouncy Boy. Okay, chill.
All right. I'm sorry.
It's just because I'm not debating Dario. I'm just really trying to like do like a feels over reals argument with him, where we're just trying to talk about this so I can like, because I want you to come out of this understanding where people are coming from with the debate bro thing, and at least be at a point where you're like, yeah, I get where you're coming from on that. Like I get what you mean by these 3 points. I see where they exist in my current way of doing things. Whether you choose to change them or not, I don't really care about, but just like recognizing that you fit this stereotype and like, I don't know. I feel like that's the first step towards anything else because you're not there yet. So that's just where I want to get you.
Sure.
So
can I pose like a meta issue I have?
Yeah, of course.
I guess.
Yeah, because it's just a conversation. So if you want to bring it somewhere else, that's fine.
Whenever we talk book smarts, I very much respect everything that you have to say, and one of the reasons why I respect what you say is because I feel like a lot of what you say is things that I've already thought about to like a lesser extent, but you put words like on it in a way that I can sort of better understand it myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, but this is my issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you bring these things up, you bring them up in a way where I feel like it's sort of implied that I'm not doing this, but I feel like I'm already doing this, and this is sort of the conclusions that I've arrived to. And I feel like you're posing me with issues. You're saying, well, this is problematic because of this, and I'll agree. And you say, well, this is problematic because of potentially this, and this is how I feel, and this is how other people feel, or whatever. And I'll agree to every single point, but I just don't understand what is the alternative. Like, what can I do differently to achieve my goals?
Okay. Yeah. So if we want, we can pick like particular things. So if we want to start with like the hyperbolic anecdotes, like, okay, Noah, but like, what else am I supposed to do if I want to make an anecdote that clearly illustrates that like one side is correct or one side is incorrect of the point? And I think you can do it by offering an example. This is more difficult, but because you do debate regularly, it's something you could think about. I like to give people an example that they can't immediately figure out the answer for. Like I like to give them something of like a riddle where it's not clear from the beginning who's the right person and who's the wrong person. Like one person who I think really does this well is Dr. K on Twitch. And I think he does this really well because he has access to a bunch of information that other people don't. He knows a bunch of like kind of like I don't know if it's Hindi or whatever, kind of like stories from like Hinduism and all that stuff. And so he's able to relate those. And people don't know who the characters are or like how the stories are going to end up or what the tropes are or whatever. So anytime he's trying to like relay a lesson or make a comparison with one of those or an anecdote from one of those, there's no charged side to either thing. There's no like anti-vaxxer or, wall builder or, all these crazier examples, Nazis, whatever. Because when you pack in those things that people are going to have an immediate gut reaction to, it's almost like you're like spitting in somebody's food as you're going to serve it to them. Like you already have a good argument prepared because you do this all the time. You understand other people's arguments and you should be comfortable navigating wherever people guide it to. So if you need to make like an anecdote or something, I feel like you could craft something up that doesn't have like a really unappealing element to it. I don't feel like that's super duper difficult. So I feel like the hyperbolic anecdote one should be easy to solve, right? Like at least that one, because you could just pick a different example that's like less, hypey. Like I feel like this is a really minor one. like don't use Nazis in your examples. Like I feel like this is one of the ones I mentioned to Destiny too, where it's like this seems like a duh one, but like once it becomes a habit, it other people pick up on it really quick.
Sure. Yeah, I get that. I guess my worry would be okay, so this is what I'll do. I will definitely try to give like different analogies or examples or like make them less hyperbolic. But my fear would be that they would be less understood or like less clearly understood, and I would have to spend way more time explaining or like making different analogies to make the same conclusion.
Do you feel like generally you have a hard time getting people to understand you when you deviate from like your structured arguments?
That's a hard question to answer. I don't know.
Do you feel like it's often that you stray from your structured arguments or not really?
Well, no, not when I'm having debates. I don't think so. When I'm having debates or like when I'm trying to have an argument about something or a discussion, I will approach it in a very similar and like very structural, rigorous way, almost always. And that is like, I guess that's like a strategy that I've built up by watching like different people debate over the years or whatever, and sort of taking and combining sort of the way that they do things. But like when I'm just trying to have like a normal conversation with people or like having people on my Discord or whatever, usually I don't engage in the conversations in the same way. Or like I'll not be trying to make any points. I'll just be making jokes or whatever, or like making quips.
Okay. So as far as point 3, the debate being like a higher whatever, I agree that the glorifying, like it's written in a very charged way, especially compared to the other points. But I think we both generally agree that like this is one where it's like, yes, this is your opinion, but I feel like you're backed up in thinking it. Like if you want to think that debate is like a higher way of like hashing out ideas, I think that's fine. I just think if it's going to be something where you're like, no, I think this is the best way because like in practice, this seems to be the best way. And that's my experience of it. And that seems to be the case for like other academics and stuff. And so
I don't understand like what is the alternative?
Yeah.
Right? If you have an idea that you believe strongly in, and another person has an idea that they believe strongly in, what is the alternative to hashing it out through like a debate of some sort?
So some people really don't like the inherent idea of confrontation that comes along with debate. At least this is my take on it, is that people don't like this idea of confrontation that comes alongside debate.
Sure. I'll yeah, that's very obvious. Yeah, a lot of people don't like to be confrontational or have, I guess from my point of view, I'd say a lot of people don't like to have their ideas challenged. But I mean, fuck. Like, what else can I do? I mean, I don't know.
Do you
Like,
think we're debating right now?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say so.
I mean, because I feel like right now, to me, this doesn't really feel like a debate. It feels like
Okay.
we like, well, because you and I had a topic, we had some understanding of where the other person was on it, but I feel like it's more about like, I want to know where you're coming from, and it seems like you are genuinely interested in knowing where I'm coming from, and it's not really about like,
Yeah.
the other, it's not really like combative in any way.
Well, sure, but I feel like generally this is how I try to approach all conversations. I think the reason why maybe you don't view it as much of a debate is because I think we largely agree on like most of it. It's just a question of like how can it effectively be implemented.
I mean, like when I disagreed with you on stuff, like just now, I technically disagreed with that. But I mean,
Sure.
like, I don't highlight it or underscore it. I don't create a way of proving that that was incorrect. Like my questions are not aimed at like revealing some fatal flaws. Like they're all kind of hinging around understanding. And I think to
But
most,
isn't your goal to change my mind?
um,
Or like change the way that I do things? I feel like that's your
yeah,
goal.
but underneath it, I really keep in the forefront of my mind that I have to understand where you're at in order to do anything with that. Because like
Yeah.
for me, it's the process of like, where are you and where are you going? Because like if I was talking to you and I fully expected that there were a million ways the conversation could go. So like I could list these, I could give you examples, and then you 2 and 2 click and you go, oh, okay, yeah, all of those, I guess, if you want to say those, that's fine. But I think that's a weak way of looking at things. Or what, like you could have taken a million ways from there. I don't feel like I'm good enough to predict it. And so when I come in, I have no idea of like where I'm going to go with it. I haven't prepped for it. I just kind of like, I have an idea of where Aiden's coming from, and I know like what I think about that, and then I feel it applies to you, but you don't feel it applies to you, and so that's why I thought a conversation would be interesting. But I'm not.
No, I would be interested in if somebody who thinks I am a quote unquote debate bro and engage in these kinds of things, I would love for them to go back to like my content or like a conversation that I had and pick out specific times where I've done these things so that I know specifically what they're talking about when they talk about it. And whenever I've asked somebody to do this who's called me like a debate bro, they've never done it. Like they've always said, "Oh, I don't have the time," or "I don't really care," or whatever.
Yeah, once they call you a debate bro, though, they've kind of entered themselves on the list of people not interested in talking to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like a self-selecting thing, though, at that point.
Well, sure, but it's like because a lot of the times where I've been on a panel show where people have said that I cut people off, or like that I'm not listening to them. Like I feel like most of the time it is me cutting people off so that I can actually get to speak because they're speaking so much. Like they're hammering points away.
Do you think that's most of it? Could you think of any
Yeah.
instances where that's not the case?
No.
No, because the talk that I was in with you about the when you were redefining liberal or whatever to include some random thing, what was it? Neocons or liberals or
Neoliberal?
something?
Neoliberal? Sure.
Yeah, so that I remember in that talk there were a lot of points where you would cut people off a lot. And it wasn't because they were going on for too long or because it was a panel show. It was because you didn't think that what they were saying sufficiently addressed what you were talking about, or you thought they were going off on a tangent that was unrelated to the larger topic.
Well, sure. So for that specific example, I had a one-on-one. Like, I know you weren't there for like any of it. Basically, you came in at the end.
Sure.
So I would I guess urge you to watch the conversation. So this is what happened. So I had a 3 hour or 2 hour, 2.5 hour maybe, at one-on-one discussion slash debate with Chud Logic about this, where I very strictly like laid out point by point, different points made went very, I guess, strictly to making examples that were like very real life examples and not like very hyperbolic examples. Like I felt like I went through sort of the ringer of doing my due diligence and trying to build an understanding. And then after that, when we were finished with the 2.5 hour debate, people would come on. Like Chud would invite like 10 different people to just come on and like ask me a question. And at that point, I'm like the one person getting like 10 different questions, right? So if somebody starts asking a question that isn't related to like anything that we talked about, or doesn't, or even shows that they weren't listening to what I said, I feel like I need to cut them off so we can get to the next question. Like that is not a debate there. Like that is them asking me a question, right? So it's a fundamentally different format.
I do remember 1 or 2 times where this was definitely the case. And I generally understand the frustration of being like, damn, why would you join this call post debate if you didn't listen to the first hour thing that I just did? And don't tell me you listened to it if you can't, for instance, read me back a definition. And I agree with you, but I honestly do think that those people listened very carefully. I just think the problem is that generally the way that people comprehend stuff and the way that people don't take notes, that's definitely going to happen. I don't know if it's necessarily bad faith, because I think that what a lot of people were trying to do in that conversation was in the very first one about the labels thing, people were trying to take it in a different direction. You were very upset about that. You weren't willing to go in the direction they were going because you thought it ran counter to something you had mentioned in your previous thing. And then you jumped to whether or not they could name your definition to prove that, which I think is kind of fair. But for other people and in other debates and conversations, you definitely do cut people off, not just because you can't get a word in, but like because you don't think that their thing is sufficient, like you just said. I don't think you get that right 100% of the time. So I think it's a bad habit to be in, but I think it's fine to if that's your style. I just think that when you get that
I
wrong,
mean, I would love to hear like specific examples, because I really don't feel like I do this. Like people say,
Okay.
like some people will say I do this, and I think people will generally say that a lot of people do this whenever they don't like them. And like from my, like whenever, like the two most famous examples I think was the first time people called me out for this was when I was on Pixie's panel show with Kay Swiftly and Mike from PA, where people said that I kept cutting off Kay Swiftly. But I went back and looked at that VOD, and Kay Swiftly talked like twice as much as me. And like whenever I cut her off, it was because she was at the point where she was like making 5 points in a row, and I was like typing all of them down, and I couldn't even address the first point before I was cut off. So
I think
like
you hang
when
on to
people-
good examples, but I think there's plenty of examples I just don't think you take mental note of where you do definitely cut people off, especially with the sure thing. And it comes off really, really bad. But if you want me to find
again,
those, I can.
I mean, sure. I mean, I would love to get like specific examples, so just so that I know whether or not it's actually true.
You
I
really
feel like
don't
generally-
believe that you ever cut people off and misjudge.
I mean, yeah, of course, I will not say never.
But
right?
that's
But I will.
But that's the implication when you're like, I don't think I ever do this. I need you to find me an example. And
I
this
mean,
is also what
sure,
people.
but like, sure, but like when I talk about it generally, I will say like 90% of the time. Like the reason why I can say this confidently is because I believe this is something that I think about like in my like at the forefront of my thinking when I'm talking to somebody on like a one-on-one debate, specifically in a one-on-one debate, but also to a lesser extent on a panel show, because I think a panel show is a bit different, as you've experienced as well. Like
Yeah.
if you don't cut people off on a panel show, you just won't speak.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, because there's like fucking 12 people, and like if everybody gets 10 minutes of speech, that's it.
This is
yeah.
this is a bit tangential to the topic. It's not exactly related. But do you ever worry that needing to perform that way in panel shows gives people a worse idea of like how you actually treat discussions or conversation?
Sure. Yeah, I've actually thought about that as well.
I worried about that too, considering like adopting a different personality or something specifically for panel shows or whatever.
Yeah, it's a tough question because because panel shows are actually so bad at like
Yeah.
everything they try to do. And I've cut down significantly on panel shows after I've grown to like somewhat of a good size that I can actually have an audience by myself. But yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of the reason why many people I guess disliked me at first is because they've seen me on like a panel show where I was basically going hard on somebody that they liked. And I think that's fair. I guess I would just urge them to watch like any of my one-on-one discussions where I
Yeah.
feel like in every single one-on-one discussion I'm very respectful. I like everybody speak. Like I try to match sort of the mood of whoever I'm speaking to. So if they're being aggressive, I'll be more aggressive. If they're being chill, I'll be chill.
Yeah.
But obviously, yeah, like for panel shows, if this is like your first impression of me, it's not always good, depending on like the conversation. But it's really hard to come off in a good way while not being at least somewhat aggressive on a panel show.
Yeah.
And I think the main reason that I go on panel shows is usually just to talk to other content creators, not necessarily the audience that much. And I feel like for that, it has served its purpose. Like I have a big reach, or like I have a lot of contacts from like other content creators that I wouldn't have if I didn't go on these panel shows and perform in the way that I did.
Yeah.
Which also means that in the future, like after the first panel show that I did, where I felt like I did pretty well, but was also granted pretty aggressive, I got invited to further panel shows with like even bigger people, even bigger content creators, because they thought that I was good at like making points while also making them in sort of like an entertaining way. So it's like it's a trade-off for sure. I think specifically it's a trade-off that I'll make less and less the more that I grow, because the more that I grow, the lesser I feel like the more that I grow, the less I feel that I need to perform and entertain people as much as I can just focus on educating them.
Stoner panel shows. That's what I'm talking about. Like, I feel like some of the mind waves, like smoke sesh stream, whatever, I don't know what he would call them. I feel like those chill ones where we're kind of just going back and forth. Nobody's like trying to get a spotlight or get the most words in or anything like that. I feel like that's really chill. The moment it turns into like a formal panel thing, I feel like the personalities come out, and if you don't get your word in, you know you have to yell over people, and like it immediately turns into a bonanza. Like, oh
Yeah.
man, it's rough. Yeah, it was just a side note because I was thinking about that, because it's like the same problem with Twitter, where like I think you do the debate bro thing a lot on Twitter, and I feel like it looks bad. But at the same time, I do understand what you told me about, like, I feel like this is the way that Twitter works, and it's working this way for me. So, like, if my goal is to make my Twitter work for me, then this is obviously a logical way to play the Twitter game. But you have to, like, what I want you to understand is the very real consequences of that, as far as, like, optics and, like, how people perceive you, and how that might last longer. You know, especially if you build like the foundation of your brand upon that, it might be really hard to change later.
Yeah, and that is a very valid criticism, a valid criticism that I've heard many times, and it's honestly like it's a tough question, because the answer is just nuance, right? Like the answer is nuance in some way or another. I think partially like what I try to do, and sometimes I fail. Obviously, sometimes I
Thanks
fail.
so
But
much
what I generally
for
try
the
to do
follow.
is that on Twitter, I will try and mix it up so that sometimes I use like humor and like I try to make fun quips. Sometimes I'll make serious points. Sometimes I'll make like a big tweet thread about like a certain topic that I think should be discussed or is important. And sometimes I'll like call some people out or like I'll be a bit combative. And I feel like there is like that is I feel like generally that is what works on Twitter. I think generally like the big threads where I talk about an important topic, they get the least amount of attention of all of these things, but they get more attention if I have a larger audience, and the other things build my audience so that the important things get more attention. And this is sort of like I guess the catch 22 there. Um, and it's tough. Like it's tough. Obviously, sometimes I'll do or say things that is gonna piss some people off. Depending people, it's probably gonna be a bad thing. Sometimes I feel like it's all right. So, for example, when I do a lot of Twitter beef or content that pisses off a lot of tankies, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing because I think those are fundamentally like against most of the things that I'm fighting for. So I don't mind pissing them off. Um,
But
Obviously, if it pisses,
what do you get out
sure.
of that, like brand wise?
Well, brand wise, I guess, I feel like I get a stronger understanding of like what my audience is, who I reach, and I feel like I can build sort of a um, common vision with my audience that like these ideas are not permissible, or like you should, yeah. Like if you think Stalin was a pretty good dude, I mean, no, that's not like a permissible idea. I don't know.
One thing I think that kind of ends up having these debate bro feeling things is your penchant for labels. I feel like you really, really like labels. Like as far as like Democrat, neoliberal, this, that, tanky, all these things. And personally, I feel like they just get you in nothing but trouble. Do you like what do you see as the benefit in all those?
I don't. So this is interesting.
Uh,
So I personally don't really like labels, right? I generally try not to use labels for myself. However, I do think labels have a really good rhetorical energy to them, or like rhetorical prowess,
what do you,
prowess. So like calling somebody a Nazi, like even if they
your
aren't like
hyperbolic
Hitler.
anecdotes?
Well, so okay, sure. So the example here is calling somebody a tanky. Like this actually happened. This is not an
Right.
anecdote, right?
Sure.
Right. So I and to be completely clear, I don't think the difference between a tanky and a Nazi is that big. So so I don't think it was that hyperbolic. But
Okay.
sure. So calling somebody a tanky, it has the effect of sort of mobilizing people against them. And this is why some tankies will try to shred the label, or they will try to they will say things that sort of blur the lines between like what is a tanky, what is not a tanky, right? And I feel like putting that label on them is a good way to sort of mobilize people against those ideas. In the same way that I think it's good to call like people Nazis, for
Do you think
example, because it
that's a
mobilizes.
troublesome way of doing that?
No, no. For that, like for those two specific groups, I think that is the only like one of the only ways we can combat them effectively. Now,
But
for things that have a lot of nuance, I feel like for things that have a lot of nuance, I have specifically worked to either expand or destroy labels or like
I
make it so that people.
okay.
Sure. So this you can so I understand where you're coming from now, okay? This is to some extent this is the entire point of the neoliberal discussion and all the reason people are making memes or whatever, or the debate that I had with Chad. It wasn't to put a label on something. It was to expand the understanding of that label and what people mean when they say that label, so that we don't have to use those labels to discredit people, but rather talk about the specific ideas or values associated with those labels.
Huh. Do you
So that
think
was the-
that obfuscates the conversation at all when you do that? Like, do you think to some people that changes the elements around enough such that they can't understand that's the greater picture of it?
2 seconds, I think. There's somebody posting shit in my. I had no mods in my chat. That's a bad idea.
Uh-oh. Are they calling me something?
No.
Am I getting bullied? FYI, this is a debate.
Yeah.
I don't feel like that is, but
Yeah, sorry, chat. Yeah, I'm not really like when I'm having like a discussion like this. Usually, I'm not paying that much attention to chat. I'm sorry.
that's okay.
Um,
So we can definitely say that number 3 is agreed that the debate, is going to be looked
Yeah.
at as a higher thing, and that 2,
Yeah.
that necessarily breeds hostility because of your approach to debate.
well, I do think some topics necessitate hostility. I do feel like, or at least I do hope that I don't bring hostility to every single topic. But it just so happens to be that I have found myself discussing some very controversial topics, and thus I will at some points bring hostility. That is for sure, especially if I think the opposing side is being very immoral, in what they're advocating for. So I guess depends on like your definition of hostility, right? So I could say, well, maybe, it does, right? So I could say, I could potentially see that if I'm having a debate with somebody, right, on a topic, and I spend like 2 days researching that and like doing all kinds of notes and really preparing like a solid argument, I can see that somebody could see that as hostility. Right?
Yeah.
They could say that's hostile because you're not willing to just come to the conversation and just like have a chill talk of whatever topic. Right.
Sometimes the way you talk when you do your research streams too make it sound like it's going to be a bloodbath. Do you ever
sure.
feel that way? Okay.
Sure. I mean, I will say that I engage in the performative hostility. but I try not to, I guess, be hostile towards the people I'm talking to unless in very specific circumstances.
Do you worry or ever consider taking that part out of the pre and post discussion hostilities, or like whatever? Like for me, it's not the pre ones that bother me, but I understand for a lot of people, it's actually the pre-debate stuff that bothers them. For me,
really?
I think for a lot of people that get scared out, they get like spooked out of doing debates. Yeah. For the people that like start talking shit up to the day of, yeah, as well, because then they like, hold on, this isn't what I signed up for. I thought we're just gonna marketplace of ideas. Why are you doing so much prep? Like, yeah, definitely some people have that take too. For me, it's what comes after. It's how you
That was
talk
a very
about
good
it.
impression, by the way.
For me, it's like how people talk after the debate. I think a lot of the times, if you're not graceful in the discussion, it looks really, really bad.
Sure. I agree. I guess I feel like this is a thing that I do as well. I mean, I don't know.
You think you're
Like,
graceful every single time after a debate, or no?
I feel like I am. I don't know.
Come on, Dario. I mean, this one.
Like, do you have an example? Wait, do you think I'm not being graceful
Yeah,
now?
like, okay, so I'm going to pick
Wait.
this. You're going to say, but I disagreed with that person vehemently. But I'm going to say that it's a good example of this happening. And the way you treat people that you quote unquote defeat in these debates and conversations really is something that people are going to look at when they consider having those talks.
Wait, what is the example?
Well, we can look to the Bernie or Bust debate that you had with Angie Speaks and the way you were talking about
Oh.
Angie.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's fair.
But I mean, there's a few other ones and like React Andy stuff where that kind of naturally comes out too, which is why I'm like, that definitely happens a lot. So
I do feel like that there is. Okay, so I'll grant you that there are some people where I will be very hostile towards them.
okay.
Because I feel like they're very hostile towards me, I guess,
Okay.
is the conclusions. So like Mike from PA, for example, like
Yeah. I don't hold
I'll
that
shit on.
against you.
Okay.
Like I don't want to say, and I'm not trying to say, and this is why I didn't frame it as a debate. These aren't like the rule of God. It's always going to be bad, you know. Like I really do understand a lot of the times when you do it. I just think there's a lot of the times where it's not that way, or there's enough times where like it goes over the top, and if somebody just tunes in at the wrong moment, they could very much so get the wrong idea. Or even if they tune in for the whole thing, like if they just watched a whole post-debate discussion, you know?
Yeah, I mean, if people tune in at the wrong time during a debate, yeah, they're definitely gonna get the wrong idea sometimes. But I feel like that's like inherent to like any discussion. I don't know. You can clip anything out of context, or not anything, but like most things, I'd say.
Yeah, but I think the volume of that is dependent on the way that you speak naturally. Like that's what I told Destiny too. At the end of the day, people are always gonna, especially when you're big, they're gonna be looking out to like clip you out of context. But you help them when you make it a habit to give them these clippable moments, and you can't act surprised when it happens over and over if you see avoidable patterns of behavior. And that's a tough place to put people because it's like victim blaming or whatever. But I really do think you can reduce the incidence rate of that and make it way easier to say, like, literally watch my stream tomorrow and you'll see that that's absolutely not what I'm like. But if tomorrow is a debate day and then you have your post-debate thing and you make a habit out of, you know, talking about people that way, they will never see that different side, you know? And then at that point, they think themselves correct because they don't see like the one-on-ones, or they miss like the very specific thing. But being polite and cordial over more and more of your online engagements means likelihood that they could easily figure out that you're not that way is higher and higher. But like with somebody like Destiny, or how some of your content is being structured now, if it's all like debate bro-y, kind of like dunk on people, whatever, then if people look to like find the alternative view of you, they're just going to find more supporting evidence of the negative stereotype. So that's the worry.
Sure. And I'll grant that, and I'll say that is definitely a concern. And I'll try and work on that a little. Link. I do think this is like very specific cases, and I understand that like some of those specific cases are also cases that have been like my most famous, I guess, debates, specifically like the Angie Speaks one. But yeah, to be fair, like Angie Speaks was definitely like being very hostile towards me and like trashing me in her own chat and like doing all kinds of things, and she was yelling at me as well while I was trying to have like a cordial conversation.
There
and to
always
be fair,
worse people, yeah.
Sure, and to be fair, again, a lot of people remember me from like the Angie Speaks debate or whatever. But actually, the person who was being most hostile was Dylan Burns. He was like constantly like dunking on her. Like he was like at so like in the last 20% of the debate, like Dylan just gave up making like points and just dunked on her, and I was like, it was hilarious, but I was like, yeah.
And then we just have the last point, not fully listening to the people they're arguing with. You don't feel like you ever do this? You don't feel like... So my thought is that by structuring the conversation in a certain way, you create an expectation that really limits your ability to like be flexible in the conversation because of that. Would you agree with that or no?
Can you repeat? Sorry.
Yeah. So having like a very clear idea of like your own idea and where you want to go with it, and then B, having a good idea of like the structure of debate you're looking for and the premises and how they should be responding to your questions, having all these expectations and beliefs about the way that things should go is going to contribute to what from the outside is very much going to look like you're not listening to what I'm saying because you seem unwilling to go in any direction that I want to pull things. You seem to very much so have a way that you want to railroad everything. And while that's an unfair like characterization, because like you said, this is built on the back of a bunch of research and a bunch of dedicated time to creating the best argument for this, and it's like the result of all that. It feels bad when people say that, but I think they feel that way when they walk into something. It's like they're walking into a maze that's already been created for them. And so as you try to goad them along, they just become less and less apt to like continue doing what you're asking them to do.
So I guess maybe we're talking about two different things when we say the word listen here.
So I'm painting
maybe?
this larger picture that ends up creating an environment where people don't feel heard. Because I think maybe listening and feeling heard are going to be two different things.
Yes, exactly. That's
Okay.
the distinction I wanted to. Yeah.
Okay.
So I will say that I think when I say I listen, I will say I think that every single time I'm having a debate or a panel, and this is something that I feel very strongly about as well. Like I will not be playing any games. Like I will not be doing like things on the side while having a debate or like a panel show. I will be 100% focused on the show and like the conversation. And I will try my best to listen to the arguments the opposing side is making, and I will try and understand them. But I do recognize that sometimes people, when I'm talking to them, do not feel heard. So they don't feel that I listen to them. Right? So I will draw the distinction there. And I will say, yes, I have experienced a few times where people don't feel like I'm listening to them. But I would argue, I guess, that most of the time that this is happening is where it comes from them not listening to me. So they don't listen to me and then answer in a way that doesn't address my question. And then I'll say, that doesn't address my question. And then they'll say, no, you're not listening to me. So that is usually how it goes.
Well, because remember that this is, if we imagine like a married couple in bed, this is you constantly pulling on the covers. And at no point do you ever let go of the covers or give any. You're just constantly pulling on it. And that's not, I think when you do that, it makes people feel like you're not listening to me because you have no intention of going any direction that I want to pull this conversation. So even if you're like listening to the words that I'm saying, if at the end of it you make a decision to not change course at all, given what I've said, then to some people that might feel like they haven't been heard. But I think there's also a whole other class of this where people, when you repeat back their arguments to them, if they seem strawman-y, or if the way that you start talking about their arguments in the abstract seems really negative or hyperbolic, then they also feel like you're not, quote unquote, like listening to them, or they're not being heard. And I feel like that happens a good bit too.
And I get that. I would say for this specific one, for the first one, I would love to have concrete examples, because I feel like all of the concrete examples that I can remember, it is them, like it is the people that I'm talking to, or at least this is my feeling. I guess this is my feeling of the situation. The person that I'm talking to is so extremely misunderstanding what I'm trying to say that we cannot continue the conversation until we iron this out. Like we're having two fundamentally different conversations, right? I'm talking about the sky's color, and they're telling me about the architecture of chairs. And then at some point, then we have to figure out, well, what conversation are we actually having, right? And then one party is gonna feel like they're not being listened to. So this is, yeah. So I would love to have like specific examples of where I did this, and like where I could see that I was in the wrong there. Because I feel like for every single time that this has happened, I feel like I was in the right.
I feel like at least in the neocon or whatever fucking neoliberal, I don't know what the fucking labels are. I purposely try to remove them from my brain.
That's fine.
I feel like in there,
Neo.
that was an example of where you very much so had an argument and a discussion that you want to had. You crafted something where, like, by discussing these labels and the possibility of this crazy thing being categorized in an improper way, that we could have a discussion about like the broader ideas and like effects of certain policy that these people are pushing.
Yeah, sure.
And I get that. I just don't think it was sold that way to a bunch of people. And when they wanted to change the entire structure, you fought against it without necessarily explaining to them that, like, the reason this is a funky structure is because I want to talk about these bigger things. I think if you said that more often, people would immediately go, well, your way of doing it is not good for anything but like an initial introduction of the ideas. Because if we keep literally debating this, it's really
so
bad.
this is a good point, and this is a point that I think you're correct there. I think you are correct in as that is what people might have expected, right? And like a lot of people said as much. But I think this sort of betrays the context of what happened, right? So what happened was that I literally wrote a offhand tweet of like 5 words. I just wrote on Twitter, modern neoliberals are leftists. Right, that is the tweet, and that was just like a whatever, like offhand tweet. Like I had written like before that tweet, I had written like 5 other tweets that were similarly phrased, but like about like different concepts. Like I said, I don't remember. I said like fucking.
That felt like a big bait, just to be frank. And more leaning towards this characterization again that people are painting you in.
Sure. So and I understand how that comes off. But like the conversation that I have in mind about this isn't the conversation or the format that we had. Because I feel like I can sufficiently defend where I was trying to go with that argument to anyone. And I think most people who are on the left would agree if they understood sort of where I was coming from, because essentially it's not like a very, very much of a hot take. Like especially in the way that I phrased it, it was very much a milquetoast sort of take. If you understand where I was coming from.
So
and I understand this. Obviously, 5 words on Twitter doesn't convey this point, and it was never intended to. What happened was that Chud Logic reached out to me, and he was like, or actually I think I reached out to him. Like we talked about it, like we're friends. We talked about it off stream, and we were like, we want to do like sort of a mixture of like a very entertaining sort of bloodbath stream combined with like I guess me getting to sort of flesh out my points. So it was like a combination of those. And what happened was, going into the conversation, a lot of people were like, oh, Dario is just trolling. He's just trolling. Like, because they didn't, obviously, from my 5 words in a tweet doesn't convey the point. So they thought I was just trolling. And this is why I think the conversation went or the result of the conversation maybe is as poor as it was, is because a lot of people came into it thinking I was gonna just troll, because that is usually the format of like Chud's streams or whatever. He's like kind of like a trolly, sort of throws quips at people character. But the point that in the end I was trying to make is a bit more of like a nuanced point about the construction of these like words and what do they actually mean, and like how can we compare different ideologies and all of these things. But at the end, it wasn't like a format or like a venue to get those points across, and that's fine. But I don't think it's like me trying to sort of drama bait or whatever, or like try.
I mean, like, we could paint this scene behind the scenes, but I mean, like, on the outside to everybody else, it is a bait, right?
I mean,
because
it depends
they don't
on
have all that.
Well, sure, but it depends on like your definition of bait. Like
You
I
love
do
your
a lot of
definition stuff.
yeah, but it is but like I do a lot of tweets. Like if you go through my Twitter, I do like a lot.
You do a lot
of
of bad tweets.
Well, I wouldn't say that it's a bad tweet, right? But you can say like I wrote the fucking Sith quote or whatever, like the peace is a lie. There is only passion. Through passion I gain strength. Through strength I gain power. Through power I gain victory. Through victory my chains are broken. The force shall free me. Like I wrote that, and you can say, oh, that's a bait. You're trying to bait a conversation there. And I mean, yeah, like to some extent, like all of my tweets are meant to provoke thought, like in some kind of way, and like promote engagement. and a lot of people did engage with it. And like we had like a few political discussions down in the comment sections there about like the fucking Sith quote, right? Because it was, when you say bait, I say it is there to promote thought and discussion.
Okay. I mean, if you want to frame it that way, that's fine. I just want you to understand where people are coming from when they view it as bait, because I feel like it's a lot easier to view it as bait than it is to view it as for productive conversation. Like I feel like most
sure,
people...
but like I feel like the word bait is like negatively loaded.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like anything that I do is trying to bait people into something.
Well, you are baiting them into a deeper conversation that's not relevant to like the surface of it. So it is. You're baiting people into a deeper conversation. I mean, it doesn't have to be a negative thing.
Well, no, but in no way did I bait Chud into having a deeper conversation.
I'm not saying that for Chud. I'm saying that for anybody uninformed, viewers, for anybody that stumbles across the tweet, they could look at it and go, like, I go, oh, is that a bait tweet? And they would go, yeah, it looks like a bait tweet.
I mean, I don't understand like what you mean when you say.
So if we give a take that obviously I would say people are going to disagree with, especially if it's involving terms that are kind of like in the current politosphere, and it's like coming up with a conclusion that people are going to scratch their heads at, which I think I'm saying scratch their heads at. What I really mean is like people are going to vehemently disagree. Some people, but I think in general, even people with like little investment are going to scratch their heads at it. And I feel like you know that, and you're trying to get a conversation that's different from the one it appears like on the surface. It's not actually like a definition conversation. It's actually a conversation about the deeper ideals of these two groups and how we could maybe unite them or something crazy like that. But it's not really a definition conversation, but that's what it is on the surface. So in that way, it's like a clickbait of sorts, or like a debate bait of sorts, in that we're going to get something different out of this conversation. But whether that's good or bad is entirely subjective. I'm just saying that like it is a bait because it is like here's what it is on the surface. It's something completely different underneath.
Sure. I guess the way that I view it is that if I write something like that and some people stumble upon it and they're like, like the way that I want people to engage with it is I want them to read the tweet and I want them to go, what could he actually mean by this? Is there any way that this actually makes sense? And I want them to think about it. And I feel like some people, well, no, but I feel like some people did so. Like reading through the comments, like there's a lot of people there who was like, what does he actually mean by that? And then they sort of looked up, like there's people who read that tweet who DM'd me, said they started looking up like neoliberalism and like where it came from and stuff like that, and found some like interesting articles about how a lot of neoliberal economic thought actually came from leftist economics or like leftist economers.
Yeah.
Like all of these things.
I'm not saying people can't take it that way. I don't doubt that people did.
Sure, but like obviously some people can take it in a bad way, but I feel like most of those people are either A, just trying to meme, like just trying to have some fun with it, or B, already hated me coming into it and are just looking for an excuse to hate me more.
I didn't hate you before I went into it, and I came away thinking that. So did the people at work that I showed the tweet to.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what to say. I mean, does it have the potential to piss people off? Yeah.
And it seemed like the author probably was aware of that ability of it, and that knowing that the author was aware of that part of it can lead people to think different things. And that's why I'm saying being aware of the effect that, like, yes, I'm saying this and my intentions are this, and there are some people that will match my intentions in the way I put it out. But at the same time, understanding that the way that you word that or the way that you put it out is going to trigger a bunch of other people that are going to have the exact opposite takeaway. I think it's worth noting. Like that people are going to come away with the opposite, because then if you actually measure out like what you want to tweet out or how you want to spark this particular conversation, you may like come upon a different option. Like same with the anecdotes or with the analogies, like taking the extra second to go like, oh, hold up, we got to put a pause on the Nazi analogy before it goes out because it might trigger this person. So let's just like see if we can make something more relevant to them or something maybe they ran into. And the other shitty thing is like Nazis and all this other stuff is really relevant to debate people because it's actually something that still comes up. But to any normie or any person that's not involved in that, it comes off as crazy talk, especially if you like actually know all the Nazi shit or like you go, well, yeah, actually debating Nazis is actually something that I do and whatever. It's like, oh boy, like it's like that it digs the hole deeper. So that's what I'm pointing to is that we can make different choices and still have the same result without necessarily upsetting all the people that would have interpreted it as bait. Like there could have been a different way of like doing that. And again, not to say that you should have done it differently. If that's your intention, you feel like you got the ratios you wanted out of it. But just to note that, like, you can predict that there will be this side that has this reaction, and it's reasonable that they came up with that, and it's predictable. Because, like, there's a lot of stuff that's reasonable and predictable that I completely disagree with. Like, that I think people have bad reactions to. Like, I don't think they should have that reaction. But the fact that they have that reaction and I can rely on them having that reaction means that, like, I can work that into my decisions about what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that's all the rhetoric and optics thing.
I mean, sure. I mean, I don't know. It's just, I mean, I feel like at the end of the day, I feel like if I go through my Twitter and like look at all my tweets, I mean, either the conclusion is that I'm doing like 10 baits a day, or the conclusion is that I like sometimes I'm just like making jokes or whatever, and like it isn't as serious. Sometimes I'm like trying to, I don't know, say something through like a meme or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Like if I write paprika, spicy salt, I mean,
yeah, I mean, like people are gonna, like, yeah, okay, so the people are gonna take it how they're gonna take it. I'm just saying, if you can predict that they're going to take it, what you intend to be a joke, as definitely not a joke, then all of a sudden that's not just a joke. It's like something people are gonna take a different way.
well, sure, and like sometimes if I feel that way, I mean, obviously I'll try and stop it before it goes crazy or whatever, as I did actually today. But it's like, I mean, fuck. I mean, I first off the thing that I wrote, like the neoliberal whatever meme or whatever, like that was like in the middle of a bunch of other tweets that were all sort of like memey or whatever, like fun little like one line quips or whatever. And like that was the one that like caught people's attention for whatever reason, and like I literally wrote that one before going to sleep. And then I woke up and it had already blown up. So I had like no idea this was going to happen when I wrote that.
Didn't you post like right after it about the ratios on it?
Well, yeah.
So
Wait, let me just find it.
I think it's okay if you knew it was going to upset people. I expect that you knew it was going to be a meme baity tweet. I just think that knowing that other people are going to interpret it as like purely a meme baity tweet for a debate.
Yeah, so this is... Wait, so do you think I did anything wrong here?
I think if you're upset that people have this negative opinion of you, I don't think it's fair that you criticize those people for having that opinion when you do these things to feed into that image.
Wait. I'm ready for the ratio. That is literally something that people on Twitter write all the time.
Oh, that specifically. No, I'm just saying that implies different than the story you just told about. You're going to bed and didn't really care and didn't know what it was going to be.
Well, no. So what I'm saying is that this tweet, I came at the end of like a lot of tweets that are similar to that. Like, so I wrote like Naruto made me an anarchist. And I wrote fucking, what else did I do? I did a lot of these. Debate bro can be used as a sexist slur. Like I did a lot of these like one-liners, whatever, because like I believe in that day, I believe a lot of Twitter accounts that I follow were doing them. So like Pseudosia and like bigger accounts than me were like doing these one-liners.
Sure.
And I thought, okay, I'll do like my own one-liner memes or whatever. And like this was the last one that I did for the day. and I just wrote like I'm ready for the ratio as soon as I posted it, like before anyone had commented.
Yeah, because you knew.
And then, well, no, I wouldn't say I knew, right? I mean, it was like a meme or whatever.
You had a guess. You had a sneaking suspicion that it would arouse some kind of reaction, right?
Well, sure, but like in the same way that the other ones were like had reactions, right? And then like half an hour later, when I was like trying to go to sleep, I saw people were like going crazy about it, and I wrote, "Okay, chill, chill, chill. I'll explain tomorrow. I'll read the replies, and I'll give a shout out if somebody can guess the reasoning, right?" And then from there on, like the damage had already been done. Like people had already like started misunderstanding what I was saying and all these things.
Even with all that, though, it feels like a big bait. It feels like you just left like some crazy weird take out there to stew before you were going to debate about it tomorrow, and people had enough time to like get all worked up. At least that was my take on it. But that's because I was already in the mindset of the debate bro thing, which again is why it's so important to like plan for this. Because if somebody says, this guy's a debate bro, and somebody has any idea in their mind of what that looks like, and then that's confirmed to them within 2 seconds of looking at your tweets or something, like they can instantly make that connection, whether it's like on good grounds or shaky grounds or whatever. When you give them the opportunity to do that, when like I feel like that's a negative thing for you, right? Like, do you get what I'm saying? That like this image exists. So now that this image exists, if anybody points to this and then points at your thing, and like it's obvious that your Twitter reflects that, and you can plan ahead with that, then like I feel like it's worth working into the battle plans as far as like all this.
Yeah, I don't know.
And other people are saying, do I mean like for Twitter to not work this way? I don't necessarily think that's the case. Like that's why this isn't a debate. I'm not saying that like in general everybody should be this way. I'm just talking to Dario because I know Dario cares about rhetoric, and so I'm just saying the rhetoric here is not good and the optics aren't good. So if he's interested in hearing it, that's just my take. I mean, if you guys want to be salty on Twitter, that's totally fine. If anything, it seems like it's the place for it. It's just comes at the consequence.
Yeah, sure. So I would say definitely the discourse that came out of that specific tweet. I think overall, especially like in the aftermath, it leans towards the side of being good, because I feel a lot of the thoughts and ideas that I explore through that were very good and that I can use in the future. And I think a lot of people also thought more comprehensively about some of these concepts. Like I have a lot of people in DMs like all the time, like writing like big paragraphs about how they explored sort of the idea because of sort of the tweet and the discourse, and the more they explored, the more they found. All these things, I think all of these things are good. Obviously, there's some people who are gonna like just look at the tweet and meme and dunk on me or whatever, but ultimately, I mean, I feel like a lot of people are gonna do that, and I feel like if I can defend myself in a sufficient way from that, I feel like it's gonna overall have come.
As long as you understand that people are going to take it that way, I guess that's fine. I mean, if you weigh that out and you make that determination, that's the determination for you to make. I'm just making sure you know the other side of the equation, like fully.
Sure. I mean, obviously, yeah. Obviously, some people are going to view it in a bad way.
Should I continue to tell you every time I see these? Or are you not interested in that anymore?
I mean, I would love if you have like a magic bullet solution to not pissing people off, but also growing immensely on these platforms.
I mean, like, you can make these not convoluted. I mean, you can have a hot take that's actually like a hot take that you'll defend word for word. But I feel like the problem is when you make a take like that needs all these levels of like deliberation before they actually understand what you meant by that. Then it's...
I mean, I do feel like I will defend that tweet word for word, even in like the literal sense, right? I will defend that.
Yeah, so you being willing to defend something, again, in the context of being a debate bro, we have to like hand wave, because your willingness to debate things or stand by an argument is not indicative of anything, right? Because you want to argue.
Why? Wait, no, that's fundamentally wrong. I feel like that
Okay.
betrays sort of everything that I do.
Okay.
I-
If that's a step too
I will
far,
never-
if that's a step
I will
too far,
never-
that's fine.
I will never disingenuously defend any point just to defend
I'm
it.
not
right?
gonna label it disingenuous, but I will say that like it's a backwards way of handling things. I don't know if it's like the way to actually reach agreement, the quickest path to agreement. I think it's like you said, it's like a backwards path so you guys could discuss deeper concepts. That's what I'm saying, is that like it's different than what it is at the surface. But I feel like I keep getting a bunch of resistance to this idea that like it wasn't what it was on the surface.
I mean, I don't.
Or does
I-
that
I
not
don't know what
connect back around the way that I think it does?
No, I'm not unsure. I'm not sure I understand your point there. So my point that I was trying to make is that specific tweet, in the exact way that it's formed, where it says modern neoliberals are leftists, I can defend that in the very literal sense, because I do believe 100% in what that tweet says. Now, what some people interpreted that to mean is that they will cut parts of that tweet away where they say, oh, neoliberals are just leftists historically, which is where a lot of people have issue with the tweet. But that is not what the tweet said, right? So I never addressed in the tweet, when I made the tweet, I was never talking about like Margaret Thatcher or like Ronald Reagan or whatever. And I feel like the modern part was what signaled that. Right, so I didn't just say like all neoliberals or like historically neoliberalism is like a leftist or whatever. I just said modern neoliberals are leftists.
I personally didn't include the list of people you gave because I feel like that was further inflammatory for very different reasons.
Sure. So that is the point. That was the point, and I will defend that. Now, whether or not these historical figures or whatever could be seen as leftists, now that's an entirely different conversation. A conversation that I'm willing to have, that has a lot of nuance, that has a lot of definitions, that has a lot of like, what do these labels actually mean discussion. That's fine. We can have that. But that was not like my initial tweet. My initial tweet, I feel like, was not that inflammatory or like not that hot takey.
Do you think some people, could you understand how some people could interpret that as like a debate for debate's sake kind of thing, to discuss through debate these ideas in order to flesh them out and explore them deeper? But it's through the practice of debate that we're doing that.
Well, sure. The other part, yeah. The other part for sure.
But the other part is the same as the first part. It's just worded more to like be palatable for you. But in my opinion, they're like the same idea.
Wait, do you think when I say, when I say modern, I don't know how much politics you know, so I'm struggling to find an analogy.
That doesn't use Nazis or anti-vaxxers.
Do you think when I say modern Christians are more moderate and able to exist in society and exist fruitfully in society, would you then cut out the modern part and just say, oh, well, what I actually understood was Christians are moderate and exist finally in society. Oh, did you know that in the 1600s, the fucking Christians raped and pillaged my land and fucking destroyed and I just like, I mean, fuck, like, you're literally like taking words out of the argument to make it so that it means something completely different than what it actually meant.
Yeah, some people
like,
would do that, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't feel like that's fair. Like, that's not me baiting, that's them baiting.
I guess what I see as baiting is when you know that people can take something an entirely different way, or when on the surface what it appears that message or that thing is meant to do is different than your actual like end intentions. And I don't think that has to be a good or a bad thing necessarily, but I think it's worth noting as like a common internet thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but I feel like the baiting part, the bait, not debate, the bait. Fuck.
The bait.
The bait. The bait
Because
part.
some people, when they see all those and they for some reason, somehow their brain's instantly able to identify that these are bait tweets. For the people that go through and look at it like that, they instantly don't want to converse you. I know I sound like a broken record. That's my main concern for you, is just that people like misinterpret the way you have debates or the way you talk with people just because of the way that you act on Twitter or after a debate. I just worry about that. Because sometimes I see you after a debate, bro, and you're a monster.
Maybe.
Like it feels blood sportsy in the discussion afterwards, even if during it wasn't exactly that. And I just think any times the blood sportsy kind of stuff leaks in, people always get all squeamish and upset. Especially people that want to avoid confrontation. And I feel like the people that want to avoid confrontation are often the people with like the worst kind of takes. And that's unfortunate. I feel like you have to create like a welcoming environment for the people that you would actually want to talk to, like the people that actually disagree with you and whatever. But that could very well be incorrect. Sure. Maybe you'll get somewhere being more inflammatory. Like Destiny does that. Yeah, it's tough.
Sure.
It's tough because all the successful people too have gotten very far being that way. So it's tough to imagine it working out differently. The people that have been nice or like level-headed or whatever tend to just like stick to news. Like the people whose perspectives I think are like more like level. I don't know how else to describe it. Like even keel, maybe balanced. They're the people that don't seem to ever want to debate anybody. They just want to talk about their stuff.
Sure. All right.
Okay. Well, as long as... Okay, so we got points 2 and 3, just not necessarily 1. You want an example for not fully listening to people or cutting them off, basically.
Well, yeah. I mean, and like number 2, I guess. So I don't agree with the framing, or at least the perceived framing of what like Aiden wrote. Because
you don't want to look like the mean guy. I get that.
No. Because I think when she's talking about those things, I think we're talking about like fundamentally different things. So I would like to hear what her examples of those things are, because I don't think I can maybe, if I'm charitable, find examples of those things, but I don't think those would be the same examples that she would give.
Yeah,
I think
probably not.
when she makes a point like that, it is vague enough so that everybody can have like their own interpretation of it.
Well, because
I think
it's a feeling thing. She's pointing to a feeling. That's why I felt like I had to communicate it to you.
And I would like to know, like, because for all I know, like none of those points would have to even be about me. It could be about like someone else.
I don't think they're necessarily about you directly.
Yeah, but I don't even know if she would include me in like what she's describing there.
Wait, hold on. I'm sorry. I'm missing this extra bit of context. Is she actually subtweeting you, or is that that's baloney?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't know. Like I don't know. Right? Like,
because if that is context, I feel really bad because I didn't know that. I thought this is just general, and I thought it applied to you. Because I think she's pointing to a feeling that people have. Like, why are people avoiding debates? Or why do people label people debate bro? Or why are people avoiding these conversations? And it's not because they're afraid of defending their points in the open marketplace of ideas, or they're pussying out of this and that. Like, that's not a productive way of thinking about those emotions and the feelings that they have. I feel like Aiden laid out a very understandable and like reasonable perspective that somebody could have. But I think everybody's going to have different flavors of this because it's at base like a feeling thing. Like if I get the feeling that this person is bad faith, it may be hard to point all the individual things that I consider quote unquote bad faith. But like if I get that vibe, it's somebody I don't want to talk to. And I think she's saying there's a vibe called debate bro. And when people pick up on that, then they don't want to engage with that person. And she's trying very hard to take that fuzzy idea and put it into a way that like the logical people whom it's meant for would understand it. And I say like logical as in like the people that prefer structured discussion and conversation to like arrive at conclusions about things. Because other people really hate that idea too. And that's not necessarily all of the people that have this opinion, but there's a lot of them that do, where they view it as like an inherently toxic way of having a conversation.
I mean, sure, but like just as I said on the panel show where she was on and we discussed this, is that I don't think Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So I don't think fundamentally that panel shows the way that they're done and debates the way that they're done, they're not for everyone.
Yeah.
Like they inherently do not cater for everyone.
100%.
And and I think personally, I think but we should also have panel shows and debates that cater to different kinds of people. Right? I wouldn't seek to necessarily change the way that panel shows and debates work. I would just try and create different spaces for these people to express their opinions in a different environment. Because I do think if you have some people who are like me participating in these things, one of us is always gonna have to compromise in like getting our ideas out in the way that we like to. And I would rather have that nobody has to necessarily compromise, but everybody can have the platform that best suits them.
Okay, that's actually like a really fair and like based opinion on this. So like you understand that these people have a different way that they want to have conversations, and that way they don't necessarily consider a quote unquote like debate the same way that you do. And you guys have different expectations of like the tone and feel and vibe and like general atmosphere of the quote unquote like conversation or debate that you would have. And you call it debate, and they look at debate and they have an idea for what you think that conversation is. And they go, I don't like those kinds of conversations. I want to have conversations that are more, accommodating to me and the way that I talk. And they just don't match up. Okay. I mean, that's a way like more, that's a way more nuanced take on it.
Well, what did you expect? Do you think I just gotta say, well, get fucked?
I mean, it seemed like you didn't see where these people were coming from at all on the debate thing, and it seemed like you were very apprehensive about identifying any part of this.
Well, no.
Yourself.
So this is how I see it. Okay, I see that they from their perspective do not think that they fit into this sort of format that is currently being exposed or used on Twitch and like on different platforms. And they are frustrated that they are not able, for whatever reason, like some people just feel very big anxiety when people are like steadfast, or like when somebody gets a bit aggressive or whatever, they feel a big anxiety and they don't feel like they can cut off people, or they don't feel like they can take control of a conversation. I think that's fine. I think these people should have formats which suit them better, which would suit me worse, like in result. But it would be better for them to get their ideas out, because I think fundamentally they should be able to get their ideas out there. I just don't think that we should change the things that are currently there, or that we have to change those things that are currently there for them to explain their ideas, because I think fundamentally all types of speech or rhetoric have their place and appeal to different kinds of people.
Do you see how when you say things like you basically put people in a position where you're kind of saying things along the lines of like, if you're not willing to debate this position, then that's like not a good thing. Or if you're not willing to defend your ideas, which essentially you equate with debating them. And if that same person can't debate you because, like you said, they view this way of having a conversation as like completely detrimental to the points they're trying to make, and you try to get them to engage in that kind of conversation, do you kind of, can you guess how they would feel about that, or how they would interpret you pushing them into that kind of conversation?
I don't know.
So like So basically,
before we continue, I really gotta go. Like, I've been having to go for like 15 minutes.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So just like, I don't know. Maybe we can talk next time or whatever, next stream.
Yeah, no worries.
Sure.
Awesome.
Right, sorry. Yeah.
No worries.
Yeah, it was a good talk. Like, at least it was some productive content, I think.
Good. Well, if you ever need like wholesome content, bro, let me know if you want a topic, want a wholesome take on it.
Yeah. All right.
Or if you don't understand people and you think they're dumb, bro, just message me and go, "They're dumb people, bro." What is
dude,
this
you would
content?
never stop getting messages from me if that was the case.
All right.